left her, and she ministered unto them. And at even, when the sun had set, they brought unto him all that were diseased, and them that were possessed with devils. And all the city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many that were sick of diverse diseases, and cast out many devils, and suffered not the devils to speak, because they knew him. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place, and there prayed. And Simon and they that were with him followed after him. And when they had found him, they said unto him, All men seek for thee. And he said unto them, Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also. For therefore came I forth. And he preached in their synagogues throughout all Galilee, and cast out devils.
Thank you. Now we'll hear the message.
Okay, starting at 29. Directly on leaving the meeting place, they came to Simon and Andrew's house, accompanied by James and John. Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed, burning up with fever. They told Jesus. He went to her, took her hand, and raised her up. No sooner had the fever left than she was up fixing dinner for them. That evening, after the sun was down, they brought sick and evil afflicted people to him. The whole city lined up at his door. He cured their sick bodies and tormented spirits. Because the demons knew his true identity, he didn't let them say a word. While it was still night, way before dawn, he got up and went out to a secluded spot and prayed. Simon and those with him went looking for him. They found him and said, Everybody's looking for you. Jesus said, Let's go to the rest of the villages so I can preach there also. This is why I've come. He went to their meeting places all through Galilee, preaching and throwing out the demons.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting that Penny's calls them devils, and some of the others call them demons.
Right. And somewhere
But I liked the description tormented spirits.
tormented spirits. Were there other things that you heard in those two versions, or as you were reading along, that stuck out to you?
Well, I had to laugh that she got up and served them.
Yeah, I always
That's
remember
typical.
that part of the story, that as soon
Get in the
as
kitchen and rattle those pots and pans,
Right. Right.
even in the Bible.
she got out of bed, she started fixing
That's
supper.
That's right.
That's an
Oh.
interesting little place, because the verb that gets used there says, then the fever left her and she began to serve them. That
Right.
serve verb is the Greek word diakonia, which is where we get our word deacon from. And it's not just service like, a waiter or someone who works in your household. It's supposed to be more than that. It's supposed to be, it carries all the meanings of being a good host, of doing everything you can, of being so considerate, that you provide the most hospitable experience for your guests. It's kind of interesting that it's the same word as deacon, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And King James uses the word minister,
Oh,
that she
yeah.
ministered to them.
Oh, yeah.
The NIV says wait on them.
Waited
Oh.
on. Yeah.
She began to wait on them, kind of more like a server, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the way I would read that. And the NSRV is she began to serve them.
Sir, that's what mine says, serve them.
Yeah.
Well, all those concepts kind of go together for a deacon too. If you remember, in the book of Acts, when the first deacons came into being, the way they've started having deacons, they had basically a bunch of apostles who were leading these early Christian communities. And what they realized was that as these communities were getting bigger and bigger, they needed some help when it came to the logistics of, okay, well, we've got to get, bread and wine and other things that might have been part of the fellowship meal. We have to get that to the people in an orderly way. And we want people who are going to take that responsibility seriously and feel called to that responsibility. And so they then had this deliberation and this election of the very first deacons. And so they were originally selected to wait on tables, essentially. I mean, that was their first role. And it became later, not much later, but it took a little time for the church to join to that very ordinary logistical ministry, the other ministries of the deacon, which are what? Do y'all know some of the things that are especially for the deacon to do?
Aren't they responsible within their community to spread the word, assist in spreading the word?
Yeah. So in a church service, the deacon does several things. Betsy, to your point, one of their responsibilities is to read the gospel. They proclaim the gospel lesson when you have a deacon in a church. That's one of the things that they do. Here, because we don't have a deacon who comes here regularly, either Will or I read the gospel, but that function ordinarily belongs to a deacon. A deacon also would generally be responsible for the prayers of the people. And the way that sort of manifests in their wider ministry is that deacons are supposed to be kind of the liaison, if you will, between the church and the world, and especially in the cause of justice for the poor. They have a special responsibility to care for the poor and the marginalized. And it all goes back to that concept of being a servant. So, the diaconate is a huge, important ministry in its own right. And we're sort of reclaiming that in the Episcopal Church. But, I think it takes a lot of education just for people to really know what a deacon is all about. So have y'all had experience in your various churches that you came from before? Did any of you have deacons in your parishes?
We had one at Holy Cross, Melissa
Yeah.
Timmerman.
Right. And Melissa also exercised some oversight over St. Elizabeth's Place, right? She had a role back there, which definitely fits in with the role of the deacon.
And her work before she came there was more in a community, or what did she work with? Mental health or something like that?
Yeah, a lot of deacons do.
Mhm.
end up
Yeah, she was mental health.
They come from the so-called helping professions, nurses, teachers, social workers. A lot of deacons come from that kind of background and continue doing that same sort of work, but with that, they're grounded in the church. So anyway, that's enough about deacons, I guess. Are there any other things about that stuck out in this reading?
I've wondered about or noticed that again this week, as in I think it was last week, that the demons, when Christ removed the demon, he would not allow him to speak. And the fact that interests me that Jesus did not want people to know who he was.
Mhm.
And also the fact that the demons would know.
Right.
I find that curious.
That is really interesting, isn't it? There's a theme in Mark. I know we've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but the theme of the messianic secret, which is, the idea is that Jesus knows who he really is as the Son of God and as the Messiah. But at least at the beginning of his ministry, he doesn't want other people to know that. So that's why he often tells people, after a healing, he will say, go and tell no one, or something like that. And then with these demons, you're right, Penny, last week and this week, there's some kind of incident with these demons where the demons know who he is. They recognize him as the Son of God and the Messiah. But Jesus hushes them up. He doesn't want that to get out. So it's a really interesting theme in Mark. Anyone have any responses to that? Why you think that might be? I mean, why would Jesus keep this secret at first?
Well, he knows what's coming and he needs to keep it sort of under wraps so he doesn't get arrested and crucified before he finishes his work on earth, maybe. But he's going out and doing all this stuff in the different synagogues and things like that, out more or less publicly. So just in every place, say, don't tell anybody who I am, just say I'm a preacher or, whatever teacher. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
It's kind of odd, right? Because on the one hand, he's trying to keep this secret tamped down. But on the other hand, it says that the whole city was gathered at the door in this scene. So, you have to wonder how much of a secret it really was.
Well, when they say to him the next morning, everyone is searching for you, he says, let us go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do. And so then he went out throughout Galilee proclaiming the message and casting out demons. So it's like he doesn't want the attention on him. He wants the attention focused on the message that he's trying to say.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, he's kind of shifting that focus to say, look, it's not just about me being a healer or someone who can cast out demons. I've got something to tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
The good news
Right.
that the kingdom of God is here.
Right. So let's jump in. We're getting into this already, and let's go ahead and jump in with our who, what, when, where, why questions. So who's the cast of characters in our reading today?
Jesus and his disciples.
Yeah, the apostles, right?
It's just 4 of them at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Simon, Andrew, James, and John.
Right.
Is that all he's called at that point?
Yep. At this point, that's all we got is these 4.
And the mother-in-law.
Yes.
She's pretty special. Without her, they wouldn't get served, it looks like.
Well, there's a place for Martha everywhere.
Somebody had to feed those guys, I guess.
That's why we have Marthas.
Simon, we remember, is the same person as Peter. Simon is eventually going to get nicknamed Peter the Rock. So we've got Simon, Peter, and Andrew, James, and John. It's 2 sets of brothers, too. We remember that. And then it's Peter's mother-in-law who is sick, and they're at her house. They fix her up, and then she fixes them dinner. So those are sort of the core cast of characters, and then we get all this crowd that shows up. The crowd shows up again and again and again throughout the Gospels. All these people who are looking on from the sidelines. Some of them being healed, some of them having demons cast out. And then So let's do the what. What are the things that happen?
Well, he heals. He heals the sick and the possessed.
Mm-hmm.
Starting with the mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And so it's a bunch of healings that take place all at once. Which again, to your point, Betsy, it's kind of hard to keep a secret, right? If he heals
Well, yeah.
25 or 50 or 100 people, who knows how many people it was. But if he heals all these folks, you sort of assume that word is going.
Well, would it be more restricted to only people in the small group? In other words, the word is being spread among the community and the synagogues, and not necessarily to the ruling, the Romans and things like that. So maybe that's what that means in terms of, don't tell the authorities, but spread the word where it needs to be spread. I don't know. That's the only thing that makes sense here to me.
Well, that sort of leads us into the where question. We'll go back to when, but let's talk about where all this is going on. Because it does say, the whole city was there, but what kind of city is this? Where is this taking place?
Well, it's in Galilee. I don't know what city it is.
Yeah.
He went throughout all of Galilee preaching
Right.
in their synagogues.
So they're in Capernaum. That's before.
That's where they lived.
Oh, is that where it was before?
So Capernaum is a city in the region of Galilee.
Okay.
And
It says here in the note, Mark often uses city with reference to a village.
yeah.
Mm.
So Capernaum was not a very big city. It was a port on the Sea of Galilee. They had, a fishing industry, which makes sense because all these apostles so far, all these disciples are fishermen. But it's a small place where at least Mark understands it, and the other gospel writers sort of go along with this too. This was where Jesus got his start as an adult. He was born either in Bethlehem or Nazareth, grew up in Nazareth, but he sort of starts his ministry and everything as a young man in Capernaum. That was home base, if you will. And so they've been at the synagogue, or what the Message called. What did the Message call it? Gathering place?
The meeting place.
Meeting place. Yeah. That's interesting because that's a very literal translation. Synagogue means gathered together or meeting together. And it's kind of a generic term in Greek, but it's pretty clear from the context of this passage that they mean a synagogue in the same way that we use that word. So then Jesus gets out of there, right? We have a shift in our setting. He goes out to a deserted place, and what happens there?
They come looking for him.
Well, that's where he, as was his custom, he went out alone and prayed.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting the difference between everyone is searching for you and what yours said, Kay, all men are looking for you, which I thought was more universal. Was that what the one that you read?
Verse 37.
Right. Everyone is searching for you.
But in the Message, what did it say?
Everybody's looking for you.
Everybody's looking for you. I thought one of them sounded more like.
What did it say in the Old Testament? Or in the
King James, seek.
King James, maybe that was the one. Maybe it wasn't.
It says seek.
Does it say something about all men are seeking you, or did I make that
It
up?
says all men seek thee.
Yeah, all men, that sounds more universal to me. All men see you than, everybody's looking for you.
Mhm.
It just struck me as being kind of a different tone.
That is an interesting verb there that gets used. It's in verse 36 as well. The NRSV says, and Simon and his companions hunted for him.
Hunted for him, yeah.
And what that Greek word is getting at is that this is not just a casual, it's not just a casual, like, I wonder where he went. It's more like, gosh, we better get a little search party together because we have no idea where he got off to, and what's going on? It's a very urgent kind of word for searching.
Mm-hmm.
Well, does yours say hunt in 36 and then searching in 37? Is that, mine says hunt in 36, like, okay, yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so then to just finish up the where question, at the end, you get Jesus's decision to spread this message and this movement, if you will, throughout all Galilee, which there's actually a little map. I don't know if you can see this in my study Bible. Can you sort of see, here's Galilee, the lake of Galilee, and Capernaum's up there on the side. And anyway, so I always think it's interesting to look at the maps if you've got them in your Bible.
So
let's talk about when this is happening. What do we know about the when?
Well, it must be at the beginning because he's only got the 4 disciples so far.
We're still just in chapter 1.
Got a way to go.
The very beginning.
Yeah,
Trying
I
to
don't
look
know
back
if I got this from a coffee with Clergy or from another Bible study somewhere, but I have written down that this is about 30 years after the crucifixion when it was written.
Yeah.
Oh, when the Gospel of Mark was. Yeah, it could be. That's a pretty good range for the date. Would be about 30 years later. That's what most people would agree. Yeah, would think.
well, when would be at the beginning of his ministry. I mean, so it's what in the very first in the beginning of the chapter, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, Son of God. So it seems like they're talking about this is the beginning of his ministry. Whenever,
Right.
are you talking about what time of year?
All the above. All the above.
Okay.
I think the only thing we know about when that's more specific is that it is the Sabbath, right? In verse 21, which is before this starts, it says they went to Capernaum, so Jesus and his followers, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. So he has that teaching scene that we had last week, and that's where the demon recognizes him. And so look at verse 29 then. If you skip from 21 to 29, as soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew. So it's that same evening.
Sabbath, yeah.
So that very evening, they go to Simon's mother-in-law, presumably, to enjoy the Sabbath meal, right? The Jewish practice is to have your Friday evening Sabbath meal. And so that's the when context of this, is that they're not just going there, casually, but they're going there with a certain expectation of this religious ceremony. The other
Brian,
yes,
they it says they entered the house of Simon and Andrew, and then it talks about the mother-in-law. So I wondered if they all, the extended family all lived together.
that's a good question. The note in my study Bible had something to say about this. It says there's no. Oh, Evie says hi, everyone.
I have you.
So this is what my note says about Simon's mother-in-law. There's no other mention of her in the New Testament. So it's not clear whether she is living in Simon's house because she is a widow or because Simon's wife, Peter's wife, has died and the mother-in-law is the female relative who can keep house for him, or maybe there's some other reason. It is true you never hear anything about Peter's wife, but clearly he must have had one if he had a mother-in-law.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it said that evening before sunset, at sunset. So it was the time of day because she wouldn't have been cooking after sunset because the beginning of the Sabbath, and she wouldn't have been able to cook. So they had to get her healed so she could get up and cook before sunset. That I just thought about that.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Oh yeah. Boy.
Have y'all seen the movie or the show Fiddler on the Roof?
Oh yeah, several
Yeah, the
times.
Sabbath dinner scene I think is really an amazing scene, and you sort of get that sense of we've got to get everything ready. You got to get the laundry done, you got to get the dinner prepped, you got to get your face cleaned up and your hair brushed and all that stuff. You got to get everything ready so that when sunset happens, you're ready to
Everything
go.
stops.
You're not working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then what happens at this sunset?
Well, he heals people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
working.
Healing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, he catches grief for preaching on the Sabbath sometimes too, doesn't he?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
For healing on the Sabbath, right? That's one of the things he gets in trouble for. And here he is doing it. We don't even necessarily talk about that with the scene, but that's really what's going on here, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so we've done the who, what, when, and where, and you see all these things that come up when you do that. I mean, all these nuances that you would totally miss. I mean, who cares that it's sunset really until you realize, oh, this is the Sabbath. He's breaking some rules here. And Simon's mother-in-law may be breaking some rules herself. Who knows, So let's get at the why of this passage. What was important about this scene that Mark wanted to include? Because if, a writer can't include everything, especially in a book that is as short as the Gospel of Mark. So what do you think is significant about this scene? What do you learn from it?
Well,
I think
excuse me. Go ahead, Nancy.
I think it's such a strong example of his ability to heal in this one.
It's almost like he himself, okay, let me put it this way. There are times when Jesus heals someone, like he heals the woman with the hemorrhaging woman who touches his cloak, and he felt the power go out of him. That phrase that's used there. And so it sort of makes you think that, well, maybe he has exhausted his spiritual fuel tank after that. But this is directly the opposite, where the more people come to be healed, the more healing is happening, right? There's no cutoff or limit here. It didn't like Jesus says, well, we ran out of vaccines today, or
Right.
But everybody who comes and needs healing gets healed.
What were you going to say, Caroline?
Well, I was just going to say it's the beginning of his ministry, as we've said, since he only has 4 disciples at that point. So I guess he is showing what he can do and will do.
And what needs to be done.
Right.
But Jesus says, let's go to the next neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do. But then it continues saying he did that, what he came to do, but he also kept casting out demons.
Mhm.
One of the things, oh yeah, Penny, go ahead.
I was just going to say there seems to be a recurrence of trying to balance his ministry and being surrounded by people with the need for solitude
Mhm.
and
Good
getting
point.
away from it all to sort of
Yeah.
refresh.
Yeah, he has that crowd who has shown up during the Sabbath dinner, looking for healing, and he does it. He fulfills that ministry, but then he does need that kind of replenishment and that time in prayer and solitude that he seeks out early in the morning before anyone else wakes up. He doesn't tell anybody where he's going. He just he goes and does it.
If he can feel that energy every time he's doing a healing, that energy leaves him, he's got to be exhausted at the end of the day when everybody is pulling that energy.
Yeah, if
Okay.
Jesus is working this hard at the preaching and the healing and the exorcism, and then he's waking up earlier than everybody else to go out and pray, it's no wonder that you catch him doing things like falling asleep in the prow of the boat. You know, it's probably not a very comfortable place to sleep, but he must have been a pretty tired guy at certain points.
I'm sure.
The thing that I noticed just from our conversation today, which I hadn't thought of before, but as we're talking about the Sabbath and the setting of this passage, um, it makes me think of how Jewish Jesus's background is. And you know, the Gospel of Mark would have been written for an audience that was probably came from Jewish backgrounds and Gentile backgrounds. But this makes it very clear that Jesus was Jewish and adhered to Jewish practices. You know, if he's in the synagogue for the Sabbath, that means that he's studying Torah, he's teaching and preaching Torah, in addition to his own proclamation. And then after Bible study, if you will, and teaching and preaching for the Sabbath in the synagogue, he goes to the Sabbath meal. And so you see a person who is an observant Jew who comes to be you know, now is regarded as this leader of a whole different religion. It's very interesting.
Have you seen the picture of Jesus and Bernie Sanders sitting on the park bench together? It said two Jewish
Jews.
men talking about helping the poor and feeding
Yeah.
feeding the hungry.
That was cool.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
That was, I mean, Bernie's turning up everywhere, but I loved seeing it with
Right.
Jesus.
Yeah, I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that Jesus, you know, we all can say, yes, Jesus was a Jew, but we sometimes forget just how Jewish he was and what that, you know, that meant to him. We talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago when we were comparing Jesus and John the Baptist and how they both kind of represent that Old Testament prophet, the Israelite prophet kind of character. They're both sort of in that same mold, and I think that's important for us to keep in mind. Is just how Jewish not only Jesus was, but all of his early followers. And then Paul, you know, Paul is eventually the guy who sort of spreads the word outside of Judaism, but he himself is always reminding us of just how Jewish he was. So it's interesting. It's something to always keep in mind, I think. there any other thoughts about that, or just generally on the significance of this passage? Okay. So what does this say to you? I mean, what are your takeaways from this lesson right now in your own life and in your own context? I mean, how is this speaking to you?
The term servant leadership, serving and leading and preaching.
Good point.
That's what the example of servant leadership. And I don't know, that's, from the beginning of his ministry, that's what he did. So maybe that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not his leadership style is not hands off, right? It's very hands on. Someone who's getting in the thick of it with you. And like we're told about Jesus, he came not to be served, but to serve. I think we've probably all known people, whether they truly are leaders or not, they consider themselves leaders, who really like to be sort of waited on and attended to and all that. That's really not who Jesus is, right?
No, unfortunately, we know some people who are willing to get out and serve today and take care of the poor and feed the hungry and minister to the sick.
Yeah, you could call Jesus an essential worker, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And that could speak another thing to why he doesn't want people to kind of talk about it, because then they'd be talking about him as opposed to the work. I don't know if it's making sense, but don't bring attention to me. Listen to what I'm saying and take advantage of what I'm doing, but don't just make it about me.
Yeah.
Make it about the word.
Right.
I don't know.
No, you're right. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I realize for me right now that I hear in this passage is, some of the things that I miss that we're not getting right now. I mean, we can't be in a crowd like this, whether it's an impromptu sort of crowd or a gathering at a synagogue. I mean, all that is very limited right now. And then the other thing, just the simple act of a family meal, or a celebratory meal.
Right.
Even that stuff, we can sort of do it. Maybe we all get tested and get together for the holidays or something in a small group, or, we're masked or outside, or, we all have these different ways of approaching this stuff, but it's certainly not the way that we were used to being able to just get together on Friday night,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
well, even like when we used to gather for lunch before Coffee with Clergy.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
We can't do that anymore.
It's gotten too cold. We can't sit outside
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
yeah, Teddy and Terry, most weeks in normal times, a group of these folks who do Coffee with Clergy every week in person would also sit inside when we could, or out there in the garden to have a picnic for lunch right before this. So hopefully we'll be back to doing that at some point soon. That would be good.
Got to order the better weather too to go along with it.
Yeah, we need the sunshine to come back.
Yeah, as I'm sitting here watching the wind pick up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything in this passage, I mean, as you sit here and listen to this and study it, I mean, do you feel called to do anything? Is there some kind of claim that this passage is making on you, or
I think the idea of actually doing the work without needing the recognition
Mm,
is a strong message in here. For whatever reason, I mean, in his case, there might have been some reasons that had to do with he didn't want people stopping him from doing it, or maybe just that he didn't need that acclaim.
mm.
But I think that's a strong message.
I think you're right, Nancy. I think that's really true about Jesus. And then the other thing that I see in this is a similar dynamic with Simon Peter's mother-in-law, right? You know,
Mhm.
she gets healed, and I'm sure she was very happy about that. But as soon as she does get healed, she goes immediately to work, feeding these people. And
And
this,
we don't even know her name.
no, this is her one mention is right here. And you sort of wonder, I mean, Mark could have left that little detail out, that she got up and fixed them dinner or served them or whatever you want to say. But he includes that, and I think that must be intentional to get at the theme that you're talking about, Nancy, the theme of service without expecting acclaim or, yeah, I think that's right. Are there any other thoughts on this? If not, then I would say let's wrap up a little early. I've got to get a few things pulled together for St. E's, and we've done a lot of work on this passage. I mean, we really got to the core of it pretty quickly, I think. Well, I kind of wish I was preaching this week now, because I have all these good thoughts. This is why we try and schedule it, by the way, so that the preacher doesn't necessarily do coffee with clergy, because then the preacher would just say, "Oh, well, Nancy Bracken had an idea."
No, don't give me credit. Just give the idea. Wasn't that the point?
An unnamed
We'll all know
Bible
what you
study
meant.
attended. Yeah, right. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. Let's close as I usually do with the Lord's Prayer. That's kind of tricky on Zoom, and so I'm going to mute everybody while we say it, and then we'll say our goodbyes. All right. Okay. Let us pray in the words which Jesus Christ Himself has taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, everybody. Great to see y'all. I can't figure out how to unmute you, so we can just wave goodbye.
You can unmute yourself. Bye. It's nice to have new members too. Thank you for coming.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Teddy and Terry. Good to see y'all. Okay, bye.